Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm sharing die cut card ideas with ink blending using the new Friends with Flair collection from Hero Arts. This is the totally awesome stamp and die set, which has a lot of sentiments with it. Then we have the Got Flair dies. These are absolutely adorable. They look like little patches that you can put on your jean jacket and whatnot. Then we have the jean jacket die set, as well as the jean jacket layering stencil. So I'm going to use each one of these separate, and I'm also going to combine them together. They work perfectly together as well as separate. Then we have the Suspenders dies. Absolutely adorable, and I love the fact that there are a couple different color choices for that. I'm going to create 2 cards with that. Before I start with anything, I'm going to use the stamp and die set to create my sentiments so that they're ready to go as I'm creating. Anytime I use a new clear stamp set, I'll use a white eraser on the stamping surface. It just removes any possible manufacturing residue. Once I've used that eraser on the surface, I use a brush to brush off any eraser bits. This only needs to be done one time. Once it's done, you can use the set. It will take the ink a little bit better. And anytime I'm using one stamp from a set, I just do the entire set so that I know the whole thing is done. It takes a few seconds and it's a really easy step, but it prevents a lot of frustration. So I'm just using some Hammermill Cardstock to stamp my sentiments on. I'm just placing them on a 1/4 sheet or 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch sheet of Hammermill Cardstock. And I'm using my Misti stamping tool so that I can stamp it a couple times to make sure I get a clear impression. Now you could use plain ink with this if you want. I'm going to heat emboss my sentiments. I love the look of heat embossed sentiments because it just adds extra texture to your cards. So I'm using some embossing powder tool on my cardstock. This is just going to help that embossing powder stick to just my embossing ink. Then I'm using Versamark ink to ink up my stamp. And I will stamp that a couple times, pressing all the way around to make sure that I get a nice clear impression. Now you could use regular ink or colored ink if you want, if you don't necessarily want the extra texture you get with embossing, but I always love that extra shine and that extra dimension you get. I'm using some Chipped Sapphire Distress Glaze for my sentiments because of the jean jacket dies as well as stencil. So I thought the Chipped Sapphire would work well with it. That's one of the colors I'm going to be using for ink blending those pieces as well. So once I've poured my embossing powder on there, anytime there is an area that embossing powder sticks to that I don't want it to, I use a soft brush to brush that away before melting it. Once you've melted it to the paper, you can't remove it at all. So definitely better to clean up your images if you need to before you melt that powder. And then you can just use an embossing tool to melt that powder on there. One question I got asked often when I worked at a scrapbook store is if you can just use a hairdryer. No, hairdryer blows air, and heat gun or an embossing tool emits heat. So it doesn't blow it. If you use a hairdryer, you're just going to blow that powder off and dry out that ink. An embossing tool will just emit the heat to melt that powder right in place. Now this set has coordinating dies to cut those pieces out. So I'm matching them on the sentiments using a little bit of Best Ever Craft tape to tape those dies in place. I like to tape them in place and make sure they're not going to move on me when I'm doing my die cutting. Once I have them all matched up and taped in place, I'm using my Platinum 6 machine in order to die cut those sentiments. Then I can set them aside and I have all of my sentiments created ready to go for my cards. Now I did all my sentiments in exactly the same embossing glaze, but you could do different colors if you wanted different colors for different cards. You could definitely do that, or you could use a combination of colors if you wanted to get really creative with it. I love the text on these different sentiments, and I love the fact that there's some that are large and some that are smaller, so you can pick and choose what are going to work best for the cards that you're going to create. They're nice and bold, and they're perfect for this collection, but you could also use them with other collections as well. So I'm starting out with creating 2 cards using the Suspenders dies. These are really easy ones to do. I've also got a few pieces cut out from the Got Flair dies. There's a lot of selection in there to pick and choose from, and most of them have a couple layers to them. So I'm going to glue those layers together so that they're ready to go once I'm ready to put my card together. So I have the little #1 hand, foamy hand thing, as well as the little smiley face. I put them under an acrylic block. That's just going to hold everything nice and flat while I'm gluing other pieces together. It just frees up my hands. For the suspenders, there is a wide die or 2 wide dies to create the suspenders, and when you die cut them, they leave a little impression showing you where those stripes are going to go. So I did them in 2 colors. I used some Celestial cardstock for my back, and then I used white cardstock for the stripes on the front. When you die cut the stripes, it cuts 4 pieces of it. So you could easily, if you wanted, you could create rainbow suspenders like on the front of the package. You can get really creative and do them in whatever color you want. There's also a little clip on them for like a little suspender clip that you can die cut. I die cut it out of some matte cardstock from the Silver Treasured Cardstock pack, just to make it a little bit more authentic. Then we have our collar as well as the little skin or neck. I used that collar die in order to cut that neck piece out of some chiffon cardstock. When I die cut it, my die moved a little bit, so I got a little bit above what I really wanted. So I just used my trimmer to cut that down. For my collar, it's die cut out of white cardstock, and I wanted it to have a little bit of shading, so I just used some Lost Shadow Distress ink for that. For my skin or my neck, I just used a little bit of Tattered Rose Distress ink. That distress ink or that ink blending is just going to give it a little bit of extra dimension to it. I'm not heavy with the ink for these because I want to have that visual dimension, but I don't necessarily want to have a really dark blend on it. For the background for this card, I'm using Windy cardstock, and I just used a little bit of Faded Jeans Distress ink to ink blend around the outside edges. Now this covers the entire card, so we don't have a mat around it. You could create a mat around it if you want. However, those spenders go from right from the top of the card to the bottom. So if you do want to cut this a little bit smaller and create a mat around it, you should assemble that on the piece first and then trim those down to the size that you want, then add them to the front of your card. Once we have the suspenders down there, I'm ready to add that collar. I wanted to make sure that if that collar happened to be just a little bit wider than how I spaced my suspenders, it would be above them rather than underneath them. And I like the fact, like I said earlier, that there's a few different choices. You could choose 2 different colors. There's a bow tie. There's also a rounded neck like a t-shirt. So you have a lot of choice there. Once I have my neck and my collar on there, I'm adding one of my sentiments to the bottom right of the card. The clips I'm going to put kind of almost in the middle of the card, and then I'm going to put my little patches towards the top left to kind of balance out where I put that sentiment. I'm using Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle for all of my gluing. It works perfectly for really teeny tiny die cuts, but it also works for assembling my card. Using liquid glue gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Like for instance, I put that patch down and then realized that it didn't have as much contrast to the card base as I had hoped. I tried to keep a lot of these cards fairly monochromatic. I didn't necessarily want a pop of color with them. I have a little bit of a pop of color, for instance, the smiley face on that card, but you can pick and choose your color scheme, whether you want it to be completely contrasting or from the background. You can really have fun with it. For my next card, once again, I'm using that Suspenders die set. I chose a completely different color as well as a different color from my background. I'm just using some Fawn Cardstock for my background, and I am ink blending around the outside edges of that with some Vintage Photo Distress ink. Just like my last card, I used some Lost Shadow on my collar and a little bit of Tattered Rose on my neck piece. Now you could eliminate that ink blending if you wanted to, but I definitely think it just adds a little bit to the card. It's one of those things that I don't think you really notice that there's a lot of ink blending to it, but it adds some visual dimension. For this one here, the patch that I chose is the one that just says I love you. So I did that, or die cut that in white, and I used some Wildberry cardstock for the pieces above it. Or no, Dahlia Cardstock for that. For my suspenders, I used white cardstock and then the Wildberry cardstock. So we have a combination of pinks, kind of like a winey pink for the contrast to that Fawn Cardstock for the background. So this one has a little bit more contrast to it than the last one, but again, you can have a lot of fun and pick and choose. Now I'm using the Suspenders dies as suspenders, but you could easily use them for stripes across a card if you wanted to. I like the fact that there is the base piece as well as the upper layers, and any of those extra stripes that I have created, I will typically just leave them in the package with that die set so that next time I go to use it, if there's some extra pieces, they might work for the design that I'm planning to use. Those suspenders are a good example where that liquid glue is really handy, because when you lay that strip down, sometimes it doesn't go exactly right. So it's nice to be able to lift it up and move it or just slide it over just a little bit. Once I have all of my pieces ready to go, I can start assembling my card. And just like last time, the base of the card, that Fawn cardstock, is 4¼ by 5½ inches. So we don't see a mat around there. Again, if you want to create one, you could definitely do that, but I would assemble all of those die cuts on top of that fawn piece first, then trim it down and then add it to your card. But some cards I do like to have the full front completely covered. It's just a little bit of a different look. Then I glued down that collar piece as well as the neck within it. And just like the last one, I used the collar piece die to die cut that neck out of a scrap of chiffon cardstock. For this one, I decided to add the bow tie. Now, I didn't want to add another ink color, so I just used my brush with the vintage photo on it just to add a little bit of ink around that. And just like the last one, I used that silver treasured cardstock in the matte finish for my clips on my suspenders. This one, again, is fairly simple with my color scheme. For this one here, I chose that sentiment that almost looks like a patch. Now, you could get crazy with the patches and use them on both of the suspenders, and there's a lot of variety in that set. So again, you could get really wild. I kept it fairly simple for these cards. For the next one, I'm using the jean jacket stencil set. Now, there are 5 different layers to this jean jacket stencil set. There's this open one for the silhouette. And then what I didn't realize initially is there's 2 layers to create the front of a jean jacket and then 2 other layers to create a back. So first off, I used some weathered wood distress ink to ink blend, keeping it heavier around the outside edges of that jean jacket. I wanted it to look a little bit distressed, a little bit kind of acid wash, if you will. So I used some water from my Mighty Mister to splash on it and then blotted that up, just to get a little bit of texture on it before I did my stenciling for the next 2 layers. So once that is done, I can add the stencil for the next layer. Now you can see I put some painter's tape on the top left corner and the bottom right corner. This just helps me to line up all of my stencils really, really quick and easily. And I use those painter's tape pieces over and over again until they don't really stick anymore. You don't need to do it over all of the corners. Just doing it in the top left and the bottom right is enough. I just put those 2 corners in and then lay that stencil down. Now I'm using the second layer for the jean jacket front, and this is with some faded jeans distress ink. Next, I'm going to be doing the 3rd layer for my jean jacket front. And for this one, I'm going to be using the chipped sapphire distress ink. Now, when I say I didn't realize that there was the 2 layers for the front and the 2 layers for the back, they're actually labeled on the bottom left corner of those stencils. I didn't really look at the stencils ahead of time. I just assumed that they all created the front. So after doing this layer here, slowed my video down just so that you can see what it looks like when you stencil just the pieces for the front. I went on and I added the next 2 layers, which ended up being the pieces for the back. Now, the reason I slowed this down to show you what it looks like for the front is when I go to redo this, I end up choosing to just do the jean jacket back, because the 2 cards that I'm going to do with my jean jacket die set, those are going to be the front anyways. So I wanted to show you the different perspective, but I did want to slow that down so that you could see what just doing the stenciling for the front looks like. So here is the first layer for the back that I accidentally put right onto my jean jacket front. That one was done with some faded jeans distress ink. Then I went and I did this one, and it's done with the chipped sapphire. And it was after I did this that I realized that line right down the front was kind of an odd line for the front of a jean jacket. That's when I realized my mistake. So I went and I did it over again. So this is a new piece of Hammermill cardstock, starting with that first layer once again, using it for the silhouette of the jean jacket, using it with some weathered wood distress ink, and once again being heavier around the outside edges than on the inside. I want it to look like it was a nice worn-in leather jacket rather than, say, a brand new one. I love when you get those faded areas on it. Just like the last one, I want to do that little bit of texture on there. So on top of my distress ink, and it's fairly subtle because the weathered wood is a fairly light color. So we're not going to get a lot of contrast between the ink and the cardstock. I did that splattering. I let that sit for a moment. I blotted it up. Then I went and I dried it quickly with my heat it tool because I didn't want to be doing these other layers on top of dry cardstock with ink and wet splotches on it. So this is that first layer for the jean jacket back that I did with some faded jeans. Then I went back in with that third layer for the jean jacket back and did it with Lost Shadow. And you can see when I lift this up, this looks much better than that first attempt with where I used all of the stencils. So again, just so you know, you have an option of doing the back and you have an option of doing the front. The stencils themselves are labeled very, very clearly. I just wasn't really paying attention and I was just creating and kind of getting lost in my own head. So for this one, I am going to trim things down and create a mat. So I used another piece of Hammermill cardstock and trimmed that to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My piece with my jean jacket, I trimmed that down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I trimmed just the whiter areas off of that because I want as much of that jean jacket as possible. I just think it looks really nice and I wanted to show off as much of that as possible. So with my mat, I'm using the Chip Sapphire Distress Ink and just ink blending around it. You could use solid cardstock if you want, but sometimes it's hard to match up solid cardstock to ink blending. So I will typically use ink blended mats for it because it matches perfectly. And I just think it's a little bit more interesting. So I have an A2 card base here that I'm going to add these 2 layers to. And once again, this is a very simple card. All of these cards are really quite simple. The ink blending adds some visual dimension and interest to them. And I think it just takes it to the next level. I kept my color palette really monochromatic when it came to the jean jackets, but I also think it would be really fun to get like really creative with it. I think like this jean jacket, say done in a pink, could look really, really fun. I love the sentiments with there. So here for this one, I kept it very simple. Just added that sentiment to the bottom left corner. You could just get really creative and go with a really fun color palette for it. I love traditional things when it comes to things like jean jackets and whatnot. I love the traditional colors. I like the kind of medium to light tones in them better than, like, I don't like the dark denim. So that's why I kept them fairly light. For this one here, I am using that jean jacket die set. I did use the Got Flair dies for a couple patches on the jean jacket die set. So I have a little heart here. I have a couple flowers, and I'm going to put those on the top left lapel of the jean jacket. My pieces for the jean jacket are cut out of Windy cardstock, but I wanted them to have some visual dimension with ink blending to them too. So I am going to put them on my sticky mat. I'm going to use the jean jacket, faded jeans ink to ink blend lightly around them. I don't want a huge contrast here, but I do want that visual dimension. So I've spread them out on my sticky mat just to kind of pay attention to where I'm doing my ink blending. On my collar, I'm going to do my ink darker towards the top. On the back of the collar, it's going to be darker towards the bottom. When it came to my pocket, it's darker on the pocket where that the top part of the pocket, the flap goes on top of it, and then for that flap it's darker towards the bottom. So I tried to pay attention to what would be lighter on a jean jacket, what might be darker. You can easily change them up if it doesn't necessarily look exactly right to you. The pieces go together really, really easily. The one thing that I did find is it took a little bit of adjusting to figure out exactly how that collar fit together to make sure that the points of the collar matched each other. For the buttons on this jean jacket as well as my next one, I'm using some rose gold treasured cardstock in that matte finish. You could use that matte silver one as well, but I thought the rose gold one just added a little bit of extra color to it. And I also thought it kind of looked a little bit more like brass jean buttons. So that's why I chose that one. But again, if you wanted to keep it fairly more monochromatic, you could just use the silver for that. And I think that would work as well. Gold would probably work as well. But for this, I chose the rose gold. So once I have those collar pieces, and this is where the liquid glue definitely came in handy because I did move and shift them around to make sure that those pieces were going to match each other nicely. Then I put the button front onto that to make sure that it covered those collar points, then added the base as well as the flap to the pocket, and then finally adding those little patches on there. And again, you can get really creative with those patches too, with the colors of them. I kept them white with some Wildberry and Dahlia cardstock so that they would coordinate with some of the previous cards, but really anything goes when it comes to the colors for that. Once I have all of that die cut, or all of those die cut pieces ready to go, I'm going to add them to my A2 card base. Again, I didn't feel like this needed an inner piece with a mat around it. I'm going to put the sentiment in the top right corner where we have some open space. I really didn't want to cover that jean jacket die cut. Now, I think this would also be a really fun shaped card. You can't really use the base of the jean jacket die for the card base though, because it cuts out where that sleeve attaches to the jean jacket. So it would be a fairly flimsy card because of the areas where it cuts out when it cuts the base of that jean jacket. However, you could do the jean jacket die set, assemble it together, put it on an A2 card base, and then use some shears to cut around it to create that shaped card, because it is a fairly simple shape around the outside edges. For my last card here, this is where I'm going to be using the die for the jean jacket as well as the stencil set. However, I wanted to assemble everything together first, and then I'm going to be using that stencil set with it. So once again, I'm doing the front of the jean jacket here. I am assembling everything, not doing any ink blending ahead of time. I will do my ink blending after everything's assembled. The one thing that I will say though is I tried to position that pocket where it was going to match underneath the stencil. That's the one thing that I would likely leave off if I were to do this again. I would leave it off and stencil that separately and then just add it to the jean jacket afterwards, so that it would make it easier to place that, because even though I tried to put that stencil on top of it and place them, it is not placed correctly to line up with that stencil set. So before I use the stencil, I'm just using the weathered wood distress ink around the outside edges, just so that we have some of that ink blending around the outside edge, a little bit of visual dimension there. And then I'm using the second and third layer for the jean jacket front. For that second layer, I'm using the Faded Jeans distress ink. And when I'm doing this inking, I am heavier around the outside edges of the jean jacket than I am towards the center. Then I go and I put that second layer for the jean jacket front, and that one is where I'm going to be using the Chip Sapphire. And this is, after doing this, this is where I realized that my pocket was not quite lined up. So there's a little bit of double stenciling on my pocket. In all, it doesn't look bad. It looks fine, but this is where I realized that I probably should have stenciled that pocket separately. I did adjust my stencil to match up that pocket a little bit better and just did a darker or heavier ink there. And again, it looks totally fine, but in hindsight, it would be easier or better to match it up. And here's where you see those lines that are cut out of there when you cut that base of the jean jacket, and that's why you wouldn't be able to use that die for creating that card base. But like I said, it's a very simple shape, but I think it could create a really fun shaped card that's just a little bit unique. And I think these would also be fun ones for, say, like teen birthday cards, because you could just get really creative and personalize that jean jacket for the person that you're creating for, create those patches or whatnot to go with what, or whoever you're creating for, what they like. Once again, adding that sentiment to the top right corner there. I chose my sentiments at the beginning, decided which card I wanted them on, but I think any of the sentiments would work perfect on any of the cards. I love the font that they created these sentiments with. I think they work perfectly for not only the words of the sentiment, but kind of the vibe of this whole line. So here is that last card there where I used that jean jacket die as well as the stencil together with the Totally Awesome Stampin' Die sentiments. Obviously, there's sentiments on each one of them. The second one there is where I used the die only and just did some ink blending around the outside edges. So you can really see how using that stencil with that die cut really does enhance the ink blending and the shading on that card. Then we have our jean jacket card that is only stenciled. So I love the impact of this one as well, but it's got a little bit less texture to it because we don't have the die cut underneath there. Then we have our adorable suspenders cards. And again, you can get really creative with your color palette. You can have some really fun and wild and wacky suspenders with some fun and wild and wacky patches on them. Then our very first one, and I chose the colors for this because of those jean jackets there. I wanted one that was in that color palette as well. You'll find everything I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for the time that you spent with me. I really appreciate all the time you spent here. I hope you have a fantastic day.